42 minutes past the hour. This just in. Orders have been given for the 82nd Airborne to deploy. As of now, the commander and his headquarters element, his staff, will leave soon for the Middle East to begin assessing what will be needed once the target is set.
There has been major breaking news on the front to bring peace into the Middle East, specifically in Iran this morning. There were about 4 cascading sets of breaking news, and I'm going to walk you through each one of them. There's also something critical that every single news agency in person is missing, and I'm going to tell you about it. Let's get to it. First off, the countries that are driving the setting for these peace talks between the Trump administration and the next Iranian leader, seems like they're all being expired as soon as they get named, are Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey, and these are no mistaken candidates. Obviously, some of them we have a little checkered past, some of them are pseudo-allies, and there's a little bit of handpicking, I think, on the Iranian side as to these 3 countries. The important point is this, and I'm going to play this clip from Fox News because it's going to give us an important piece of the puzzle.
Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey are reportedly leading mediations as Gulf countries come under continued Iranian attack. Tuesday, President Trump said Iran had given him a present worth a tremendous amount of money. He didn't elaborate on what the gift was, but said it's a sign they're dealing with the right people. As the framework for current negotiations is ongoing, here's what President Trump had to say.
It all starts with they cannot have a nuclear weapon. Just, I said yesterday, they said, what are the top 10? I said, well, number 1, 2, and 3 is they can't have a nuclear weapon. And they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. And we're talking about that. And I don't want to say in advance, but they've agreed they will never have a nuclear weapon. They've agreed to that.
So the key piece of the puzzle here that I want you to pay attention to is as the leadership has been identified, the new leadership in Iran over the last 10 days, you can see the factions building. I'll put it that way. And there's no doubt that the Trump administration and our deep state, who's driving massive funding in trying to get some coalitions built over there, that they have their preferred candidate. My question, though, is, are we speaking to the right people? Just because you're going to get a gift that's worth a lot of money, that's Donald Trump's words, not mine, I'm not certain that means that you're speaking to the right people. And you need to put yourself again into the middle of this. If you're on the U.S. side of negotiating and you have this whole cascade of leadership that's all jockeying for position, some of which is regionalized and some of which is centralized within the old Iranian structure that is fighting for its life, I think you're seeing the problem here that who exactly is going to be the next leader, one, who exactly can speak for that administration at this point in the war, and thirdly, you're dealing with overly militant arms of the old guard, which may very well be the new guard, and none of them are having any part of this. It just depends on who you're talking to, and that's why we're getting a ton of mixed signals. So what we heard very early this morning is this. As Trump administration has been saying that things are moving along well, that was the latest headlines from last night. Now you can see that Iran has officially rejected the U.S. peace proposal because there's really 5 conditions that Iran wants, or it ain't going to any table. First, the immediate end to attacks and the attempts of expiring leaders' lives in Iran. I want to make this YouTube safe. Secondly, the establishment of concrete guarantees against future attacks. Third, clear determination and guarantee of payment for war damage. 4, international recognition of Iran's authority over the Strait of Hormuz. And 5th, to end the war across all fronts, including all Iranian proxies in the region. So this is a hodgepodge of conditions. I think clearly 3 of these, there's no way that Iran is going to get Trump to concede. And remember, Trump is leading this with his group of negotiators that we're going to talk about next. But the point is that Israel and Netanyahu absolutely are driving a lot of the conditions past just not having a nuclear weapon for the Trump team to negotiate some kind of peace agreement. Meantime, what we have, though, is a ceasefire of sorts. This is, kind of balancing on toothpicks, because if either the U.S. or Israeli side kind of spur off a little bit, or conversely, if the Iranians do, this is going to fall apart fast. So the point here is that we're moving into neighboring countries establishing a table to have discussions. The discussions with the Iranian parties, I think, are scattered at best, because, again, you have this jockeying for position, and now we're seeing a complete rejection from whoever can voice this rejection within Iran, that they're not going to go anywhere in the coming days and meet with a contingent from the U.S. unless these 5 base points of negotiation are immediately agreed upon. I don't think you're going to get that at all. So what did Iran do, though, right after it declined the peace offer? They sent out this video on social media across all their channels, and I'm curious what you think. Vengeance for all. So clearly a propaganda tape, right, from somebody within the regime, or at least somebody that has interest in the regime's interests. You can do the math there. Think Russia, think China, but don't just immediately mark this up to Iran. The point of this is that this was a very well-timed rejection and propaganda effort that immediately came out just after the press release this morning that Iran is rejecting any peace attempts without those 5 demands. What else, though, did Iran say that was a key piece of the puzzle? And this is leading into, and I want you to stay tuned here because I'm going to tell you something that everybody's missing. This next point, though, is leading right into it. First, Iran did say this when they rejected their peace talks. They reject the peace talks with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, but they did indicate a preference for negotiating with Vice President JD Vance. Interesting. Why would they reject Witkoff and Kushner? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Those were the 2 individuals that were leading peace talks, or before the war, negotiating some stabilizing agreements to prevent a war. And then next thing you know, on a Friday night, it's game over. So Witkoff and Kushner were bringing the previous Iranian negotiators to the table, and there is no question about it that Iran has a lot of distrust, and most likely for good cause. The last time they saw Kushner and Witkoff was just before they started to see the full brunt and force of the U.S. military and the Israeli military. But this article and this post here goes on. Iran reads JD Vance as the figure within the Trump administration that's most likely to accept a deal that ends the war without demanding permanent Iranian capitulation on enrichment. This is a key piece of the puzzle, right? When you're going at it from Israel and Netanyahu's perspective, this is one of their key points. When you get at what Donald Trump just said in a previous clip, it goes back to enrichment. for some reason, and I'm not certain why, Iran is reading JD as somebody that can maybe have a little bit of a softer approach as it relates to the enrichment, whereas Donald Trump, JD's boss, has been quite clear. Now, Axios, and again, consider your sources, right? You can see that one of the ones here above was a little bit of CNN, so take it at half blush. Axios here, again, take it at half blush, reports that JD Vance already briefed Netanyahu on yesterday, about the components of, or 2 days ago, I'm sorry, about the components of a possible agreement. An Israeli official confirmed that mediating countries were trying to convene a meeting in Islamabad with Jabba the Hutt. I was going to say that's obviously wrong. Jalabaf, who's representing Tehran and the Iranian contingent, with the U.S. bringing in Witkoff, Kushner, and possibly Vance at that time. So again, Vance is the 50-50, and you'll see that Iran wants him at the table. And I think if that's the case, and Iran forces the administration here to either elevate and ensure that JD Vance is there, or elevate JD Vance's position once there, that this is going to sideline Kushner, and it will absolutely reduce Israeli influence. That, and it's going to also reject the preference and kind of lose a little bit of the stability or the dictating of terms from the Trump administration. This is negotiating at the highest levels, and what you're seeing is two different opposing parties trying to come to an overlap and get some agreement. And you see that this Iranian group is trying to dictate some terms so that they can get some small wins and kind of, allow Trump to just say, okay, fine, get what you want. The bigger question, though, is, are these demands a test of the internal U.S. cohesion and the cohesion that the U.S. has with Israel? What happens when Witkoff and Kushner get tabled? What happens if this goes even further, where they say Witkoff and Kushner, they're not even allowed in the same room? This is where things start to get a little sideways, but this is also a critical time, no question, for JD Vance. This is his calling at this point, and is probably the most important task he's ever been assigned. Certainly in his role as VP, but I would guess in his whole life. This is critical. So is Iran not just choosing their envoy, but are they trying to probe the seams within this coalition between the U.S. and Israel? I would argue that's exactly what they're doing. But this is the piece of the puzzle where nobody else is talking about. This data just broke again this morning that JD Vance, who you would think is one of the two candidates to lead the charge going into the 2028 Republican ticket, well, if you believe the betting markets, his odds are crashing. They're going to an all-time low. Also, interestingly, and again, these let me put it this way. These betting markets have shown in the last handful, maybe 18 months, to be very accurate, and certainly more accurate than any of the polling that you're seeing out there from either the conservative Republican side or the traditional Democrat pollers. These types of betting markets have actually been right on. So the question is, why is JD Vance's swag and momentum losing traction going into 28? And the bigger question is, what will these negotiations, if he were to take the lead role, this is it. This is it. If JD Vance can drive an agreement that Trump can agree to, that Netanyahu can agree to, and that the Iranian contingent can agree to, he very well may have just sealed his ticket for 28. Now, keep in mind, the other person that you don't see at all mentioned in here is Marco Rubio. Rubio has, the joke has been that he's worn a bazillion different hats within the Trump administration, not just Secretary of State, and that's true. But when you see here that JD Vance is getting thrust into the Middle East and into this lead position potentially with the negotiations, this, if you assume that Marco Rubio is just human, which of course he is, then you know that he wants an ability to showcase his skills and he wants an ability to be part of this solution. There's no doubt that he's part of this, but I mean the visual and the visible part of this. JD Vance very well may take the role, and it may be just in time for him to save his chances going into the 28 elections. Let me know what your thoughts are. This is a big deal. And again, these 5-6 moving parts of the puzzle that all came out in a cascade this morning show me that this is still very much fog of war. And none of this is done just yet. But we're starting to see a theme, and we're starting to see some characters. Some characters losing their swag with Kushner and Witkoff, and some characters, JD Vance, being called to do something that he's never been called to do before. So now JD Vance has an opportunity to lead a coalition in the American interest to try to get peace in the Middle East, something that no president, quite frankly, has really been able to do for 40 plus years. And this with an adversary that we've had a terrible history with for 50 years. This is tough. And this is also, incidentally, exactly why many of the America First people, quite frankly, have not been wanting to get into this war and have not been supportive of it. This has been a wedge issue within the Republicans. And if you disagree with that, that's fine. But you're disagreeing with facts. Because the facts of the matter is that President Trump was platforming, really trying to be less of a warmonger and less of a police of the world. And now we have this. This is a big deal. JD Vance could potentially come in and save the day. We'll see. So the next video, and you're not going to want to miss this, is a huge push by Donald Trump right into NATO's power structure. You do not want to miss this. It's next. Have a look.